Hi, I'm Carla Walker with At Properties Christie's International, and today my quick clip is going to be about co-ops.
I'm Mark Ollie, the Co-op Lending Manager here at Chicago Financial Services. It's great to be with you, Carla, and I'm delighted to talk about co-ops. What do you got for me today?
Well, what I've got for you is, I know you handle these. In my opinion, he's the best co-op lender in Chicago because he knows the ins and outs of the process, and I'd like you to talk about that process.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what a co-op is and the difference between perhaps what differences are between a condominium transaction. To the eyes of the buyer, it's going to feel like a condominium transaction, but the paperwork's different. And our goal is to get people comfortable with that and knowledgeable about it through the process and make it seem seamless. But technically, you're buying shares in a corporation. You're buying into a business, so to speak, when you're purchasing a co-op. So the lending on it's different, the products are different. Even though you're buying what turns out to be a really beautiful home. So we're lending in shares of a corporation, and there's something called a proprietary lease that links those shares that you purchase in the corporation to the actual unit that you inhabit. And I would say that's probably the main difference that I share with folks about that transaction.
All right, but I do know there's more involved in the co-op purchase. It's a little more vetting, and that is something that I think would be good to share, just why that is involved in the process of purchasing one.
Well, there's two differences I think that are key from a standard single-family home or condominium transaction. One, the product is different that's used for lending. Because we're lending on shares of a corporation, Fannie and Freddie have a more limited scope of products to use for that transaction. Like there is no personal lines of credit, there's no construction loans. There's the basics. You got a 30, 15, and 20-year fixed mortgages. There's some ARM products. We have conforming and jumbo lending available on co-ops. And that really does cover 90% of the needs of most buyers today. The second is that there's also something called the board approval process, which I tell clients is really an exchange of information. You know, people get worried about it, but the board is going to ask you for very similar things that the bank does. They have their process, and that's really to educate you about the building that you're buying in. You know, let's say you want to do a kitchen renovation. They have really a template in place on how they're going to move that through their system, because after all, you're sharing the same piping together, elevators together, and they want to make sure that you understand that process, whatever the process might be that you're inquiring about. But that's one example I get a lot is renovations.
Okay, well, it makes perfect sense. One of the things I like about co-ops is that it's more of a community. Your board members, of course, reside on the property, and it's a nice style of living for someone that doesn't want to be in a big building, that likes privacy, that likes solid construction, because far and few between are there co-ops that weren't built in the early 1900s. There's probably one building I can think of is a Mies van der Rohe building on East Lake Shore Drive. So I see many pluses also in that they're in some of the very best locations in the city. They often are in very walkable locations. If you remember back to the early 1900s, everybody didn't have a car. So that's just some highlights. But Mark, typically how long does it take for a co-op loan?
Well, you know, we have long-term relationships with roughly the 100 co-op buildings that are in the city. We can get them done in 30 to 45 days. It really depends on how long the board takes for their process. But our process, because everything's done in-house, happens really quickly. And it really depends on the borrowers as well. If they get us the information quickly, we can get things done very, very quickly as well.
I actually had a co-op buyer that Mark took care of several years back, and I can attest to the quickness of that loan because it's something that he's used to doing. And if you get all your paperwork pulled together in advance, it's going to be clear sailing.
And that paperwork that we request is many times the same paperwork that the board's going to request for the review process.
Right.
And like I said, it's a great way for you to learn about the building before you move in as well. It's a great information exchange because it is a community, as you pointed out.
Right.
There's not that many units in a building, and they really do live like single family homes, so many of them in the city. I hear that a lot from clients. It felt like a home when I walked inside.
It's true.
And they're substantial. They have a lot of square footage. And as you've told me earlier today, they're really great values.
Very much so. So on that note, if you think that's the style of living you might like to pursue, by all means you should. Work with someone who's familiar with co-ops, as I am. I work in the Gold Coast, and there's quite a few of them there. You've got an expert team member here who is on top of the co-op financing, and talk to us, and maybe your next home will be your best home. Thanks for listening.